Discuss particularly around education, and to discuss it further, I'm now joined by social activist and chartered accountant Khaya Sithole. Khaya, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
All right, so I know you haven't read 752 pages since the report was released around about lunchtime today, but there's the executive summary, and you might have had a hint of some of the things that are coming out. Your first response and reaction to what the report says?
I think when I first got hold of the report and I realized that obviously what it said was not surprising to some of us, because I think given what the Commission had been given access to and the very restrictions with which they were operating, an income contingent loan system was always going to be their default option. It would have taken a leap of faith on their part to say, actually, we want to advocate for something that is far more radical. And in the context of where they are and the political sensitivities, I think they went for the safest option, which is the loan system.
So let's talk about the loan system, because it sounds like they're shifting from NSFAS kind thing to the banks getting guarantees from government. Now, why NSFAS went broke was largely because students were not finishing degrees and they ended up not being able to pay back the loans that they got. Surely just shifting the guarantees to the bank was still at the same place. Hasn't really changed the game.
Yeah, I think it's quite unfortunate that they actually don't seem to have sensitized themselves to the fact that the reason NSFAS was a problem was because structurally it was advancing loans without offering the requisite support to the students. So naturally either students didn't graduate, or when they did graduate, NSFAS was so poor in tracking and collecting the monies from them, it just never amounted to anything. So what they've done now is that they've simply said, look, we're still advocating for a loan system, but we do acknowledge the limitations in NSFAS. So what NSFAS is going to do now is that it's actually going to stop trying to collect simply because it's incapable of doing so. What we're doing is that we're shifting the financing arrangement to between the state and the banks. And of course, the banks do have the capital to advance up front. So of course, they're going to put the money there. And what is also quite unique here is that the banks cannot possibly lose, because if I enter the university system and I graduate, I will pay back my loan. But if I don't graduate, then the state has to step in and pay on my behalf. So the banks themselves have been insulated from the risk, and it's just the state that actually has to bear the brunt of these loans.
All right, so the Khaya Commission has come up with its thoughts and recommendations, but you've worked with Wits University students. Shall we call it the Sithole Commission? What were some of the ideas that came through from your discussions with the students there?
The fundamental thing that we looked at is how to make the system self-sustaining and self-sustainable on its own capacity as a university system. So if you look, for example, at a pension fund, you've got people who contribute, and then you've got people who use whatever's in them. So the way we articulate it is that you need to stratify the university population and refer to it as a group of contributors who are the graduates who are in a position to put something into the pot. And then you've got the students themselves who are the users. And the reality here is that in the South African context, with the levels of poverty that we have, a lot of students, when they enter the university system, quite simply cannot afford it. So for us, it was like you should be able to enable access. And once people are within the system, it really transforms their fortunes, because in South Africa, graduates have got a much higher rate of getting employed, a much higher possibility of having some economic power and some economic potential in the future. So we simply said that the question of asking how this should be funded should not be asked at the inception level, which is when people are students, but rather when people are in the graduate side of the conversation, we can invite a conversation that then says, look, I've been a student, I've benefited from a subsidized education system. What is it that I can put back into this? And another key issue that we identified is that historically, a lot of the students who think that they're paying their way into the system, who are regarded as rich students, are actually paying their way into a subsidized system. But currently only the black poor students who couldn't pay anything at all ever get asked to pay back on the other side. And we felt that that actually entrenched the inequalities in the system. So we're saying that if we're going to be saying graduates must make a contribution, it's everyone who's actually participated in the university system. And if you design a model like that, it means that the pool of graduates from which you could potentially collect some funding exceeds the number of people that actually need to be paid for in the university system. And we created a model that we proved would be self-sustaining within a 7-year period. We presented this to the finance minister at the time, and unfortunately the finance minister at the time, the DG of Treasury at the time, and the DG of the budgeting at Treasury at the time are now all gone.
Okay, so there's a thought that you've put through. I'm just wondering now, if we look at the bigger story, two issues for me. I look at a country like Germany. University students are about a minority when compared to the TVET system. The Khaya Commission is talking about 50 billion being put into the TVET system. Is that something we should be looking at?
I probably wouldn't agree with the way that they've said that the TVET system should be taken care of, because the problem in South Africa is that the TVET system itself suffers from this stigma issue where nobody wants to go to the TVET system. Everybody wants to crowd the university system. And the reality is that the basic education that everybody's exposed to probably doesn't prepare them very well to be university students in the first place. So one of the more radical proposals we had put forward is to say, perhaps in the South African context, it doesn't make sense for anyone to be given direct access to university. If you then say to everybody that exits matric, their starting point will be the TVET college system, it means that the stigma is removed, because then it's not a system that is populated by the poor and the less academically able. And after a 2-year period, perhaps people then get screened out of it. Somebody who's done very well within the TVET college system can then be told, look, you've done 2 years here, 2 more years at Wits University, you get your degree. And some people will, of course, say, I want to stay here and finish my artisanship and something like that. So you actually need a fundamental overhaul of the system. What this commission has done is that they've simply said, we must go and raid the unemployment insurance fund, take 50 billion rand from it and use it to create infrastructure within the TVET college system. But unfortunately, that is not going to deal with the fundamental issues that are academic within that institutional setup, to say still students won't want to go there. So even if you make it free, it's not going to create that incentive for students. It will simply be, if I couldn't get into a university model, then I will go to the TVET college system. So I think they've probably taken the easy way out even of the TVET college conversation.
Khaya, I wish I could talk to you for longer, but I've got a cough, so I'm going to leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.